My 8th grade teacher became obsessed with the 10-year-old who died in her arms during a school shooting. 2 months later, she staged a fake active shooter drill and forced my classmate to play dead in the same closet where the girl bled out. Then we found out our school counselor was using us for her dissertation on trauma-based learning. After the school shooting at the nearby elementary school, 3 children were shot dead. One of them was 10-year-old Amelia, who bled out in Miss Lee's arms. And 2 months later, she became my 8th grade history teacher. At first, she seemed normal, just wanted to keep us safe. She locked our door even during class and memorized every parent's face. When the intercom crackled, she'd freeze for a second before continuing. But as winter turned to spring, Miss Lee's protection shifted into something scary. In place of our usual classes, we had special safety games. It's where we had to hide in assigned spots around the room as fast as possible. She timed us and said we needed to hit her old class's record. My spot was the coat closet, which felt too small, but Miss Lee swore it was the safest place. The closet saved someone once, she told me. Her eyes looked far away when she said it. The games were kind of fun until Miss Lee started staring at my friend Isabella during them. Isabella had brown hair and freckles just like the girl in the newspaper photo. Sometimes Miss Lee would call Isabella Amelia, then look confused. I'd constantly hear her whisper, 22 new chances, while counting us. As more time passed, the more she talked about her old class and how she should have been harder on them when they laughed during drills. We tried to tell ourselves it was just part of the process, but I knew none of this was normal when she interrupted class one day to show us her lock screen. It was a photo of her old class. She pointed to each child and told us their names. When she got to Amelia, she started hysterically sobbing. She could barely speak, but even in that state, she made us memorize where Amelia sat and how she hid. Amelia was quiet, I remember her saying, but not quiet enough. From there, I was forced to watch as Miss Lee practically descended into madness. I could tell something terrible was coming, but nothing could have prepared me for that Friday in May. Miss Lee's hands shook so bad she dropped her coffee. She checked her phone constantly and whispered, "Next time I'll be better," to Amelia's photo. She made us practice hiding 6 times before 10 o'clock, and her voice sounded strangled whenever she spoke. "Today you show me you can survive," she said. "Today you prove you're better than my old class." Those were the worst words she had ever said. She unlocked the side door, which was against every school rule. She told us this was our most important drill ever as she positioned Isabella in the corner exactly like in the old photos. We had to be perfect or we'd end up in a grave just like Amelia, she warned us. At 10:15 a.m., the hallway exploded with sound. Gunshots echoed off the walls, making my ears ring. Miss Lee screamed, "Hide now, this is real!" We scattered to our spots as she'd trained us. I dove into the coat closet with others pressed against me. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would explode. Miss Lee barricaded the door with her desk with impossible strength. The room went dark. "Stay quiet," she hissed. "The loud ones die first." A man yelled, "You will pay!" in the hallway, getting closer. Kids sobbed but tried to muffle the sound. I felt something wet on the floor. Miss Lee crawled to Isabella and grabbed her roughly. "You're Amelia now," she said, pulling Isabella toward my closet. "You have to be Amelia for me." Isabella tried to resist, but Miss Lee was too strong. She forced Isabella into a specific position on the floor. She grabbed Isabella's hand and held it exactly like something she remembered. "Say you're scared," Miss Lee demanded. "Say, Miss Lee, I'm scared," just like Amelia did. Isabella sobbed the words, and Miss Lee started crying too. She showed us a horrible photo on her phone. It was a girl covered in blood in a closet. "This is what happens when you're not quiet enough," she said. Amelia learned too late. Finally, the intercom came on, and the principal walked in to announce it was safe. But instead of leaving us alone, Miss Lee stared, laughing hysterically. "That's what they always say before more shooters come," she yelled at the top of her lungs. She made us stay hidden for 6 hours. Parents gathered outside, but she said they were fake. When police finally broke in, Miss Lee looked victorious. "I saved them all this time," she exclaimed. Then, with dark eyes and the creepiest smile I'd ever seen, she stared at Isabella and triumphantly said, "I saved you, Amelia." The officers finally got her into the patrol car while she sobbed and pressed her face against the window. And that should have been the end, but it wasn't, because by a stroke of luck, the officers decided to go through her phone. And when we found out who the shooter was, life was never the same again. The police station felt cold even though it was late May. My parents sat on either side of me while Detective Martinez scrolled through Miss Lee's phone. The other kids from class had already given their statements and gone home, but they kept us longer because I'd been in the closet where everything happened with Isabella. Detective Martinez turned the phone screen toward us. The video showed our classroom from an angle near the ceiling. Miss Lee must have set it up weeks ago. In the footage, she unlocked the side door at exactly 10:14 a.m., then sent a text message. 1 minute later, the shooter appeared. My stomach dropped when I saw who walked through that door. Mr. Davidson, our school janitor who always gave us extra cookies at lunch. He wore a black hoodie and carried what looked like a real gun, but turned out to be a starter pistol from the track team's equipment room. The video showed him firing blanks in the hallway, while Miss Lee orchestrated our terror from inside. My mom gripped my hand tighter as we watched Mr. Davidson follow Miss Lee's texted instructions. Move to the science wing, fire 3 shots, yell the scripted words, wait 5 minutes, return to the janitor's closet. The whole thing had been planned like a twisted play. Detective Martinez explained that Mr. Davidson lost his daughter in a school shooting 5 years ago. Miss Lee found him at a support group and convinced him this would help prepare kids for the real thing. They practiced after hours when the building was empty. He even helped her install the hidden camera. The evidence was overwhelming. Text messages planning every detail, photos of them meeting at coffee shops, voice recordings where Miss Lee explained how traumatizing us would save our lives someday, Mr. Davidson crying and saying he just wanted to prevent another tragedy like his daughter's death. My dad asked if we could leave, but Detective Martinez had more questions. She needed to know exactly what Miss Lee did with Isabella in that closet. I described how she forced Isabella to play Amelia, how she showed us that horrible photo, how she made us stay hidden for 6 hours while parents begged outside. The detective took notes and said they'd need me to testify eventually. My parents exchanged worried looks. I just wanted to go home and forget this ever happened, but I knew it would follow me forever. We left the station as the sun was setting. Other families from class stood in the parking lot, hugging and crying. Isabella's parents looked destroyed. She hadn't spoken since the incident and would need therapy for years. Several kids had wet themselves during those 6 hours. Others had panic attacks, all because 2 broken adults thought they were helping us. At home, I couldn't eat dinner. The sound of the starter pistol kept echoing in my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Miss Lee's face as she forced Isabella to be Amelia. My parents tried to comfort me, but what could they say? My teacher had traumatized us on purpose. The next morning, reporters crowded outside our school. The principal sent emails saying classes were canceled indefinitely. Social workers would be available. Security measures would be reviewed. Parents demanded answers about how Miss Lee passed background checks, how nobody noticed her declining mental state, how Mr. Davidson had access to stage this nightmare. I spent the day in my room, scrolling through social media. Everyone was talking about it. Some kids from class posted about their experiences. Others shared photos of Miss Lee from better days, when she seemed like a normal teacher who just cared about keeping us safe. The transformation was terrifying. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. It was a photo of me in the coat closet during the fake shooting, taken from Miss Lee's hidden camera. The message read, "You were so brave. Amelia would be proud." I showed my parents immediately. They called Detective Martinez, who said they'd trace the number. But I already knew it had to be someone else involved. Miss Lee was in custody. Mr. Davidson was in jail. Who else knew about the camera? Who else had access to the footage? That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. My parents took turns checking on me, but nothing helped. The text message meant someone else was out there. Someone who thought what Miss Lee did was right. Someone who might try to finish what she started. The next day, Detective Martinez called with disturbing news. The phone number belonged to Mrs. Sanders, the school counselor who'd been meeting with Miss Lee weekly. She'd been documenting Miss Lee's decline, but never reported it. Instead, she'd encouraged the therapeutic reenactment idea, even helped plan some details. My parents were furious. How many adults had failed us? How deep did this go? The detective assured us Mrs. Sanders was being questioned, but I could tell there was more. This wasn't just 3 broken people making terrible choices. This was a network of trauma and misguided protection. Over the following days, more connections emerged. The support group where Miss Lee met Mr. Davidson was run by Dr. Hoffman, a psychologist who believed in exposure therapy for preventing school shootings. Miss Lee's idea of special safety games makes regular fire drills look like a trip to Disney World. Nothing says learning history like forcing kids to practice hiding from pretend shooters while she whispers creepy countdowns to herself. Several members had conducted similar drills at other schools, though none as extreme as Miss Lee's. The story exploded beyond our town. National news picked it up. Experts debated whether traumatizing children could ever be justified. Parents across the country demanded to know if their kids' teachers attended similar support groups. The footage from Miss Lee's camera leaked online, though authorities tried to contain it. I became the face of survival, the kid who hid in the closet where Amelia died. Reporters called constantly until my parents changed our number. Strangers sent messages saying I was brave or lucky or stupid for not realizing sooner. Isabella's family moved away to escape the attention. School remained closed while administrators figured out how to move forward. Some parents pulled their kids permanently. Others demanded every teacher undergo psychological evaluation. The building felt cursed now, tainted by manufactured trauma layered over real tragedy. Detective Martinez visited again with more questions. They'd found journals in Miss Lee's apartment, detailed plans for escalating drills. She'd intended to make them progressively more realistic. The fake shooting was supposed to be phase 1. Phase 2 involved fake blood. Phase 3, I didn't want to know. My parents discussed moving, starting fresh somewhere else. But running felt like letting Miss Lee win. She'd wanted to prepare us for violence by inflicting it herself. Leaving would mean she'd succeeded in destroying our sense of safety forever. Therapy helped, slowly. Dr. Patel specialized in trauma from school violence, both real and simulated. She explained how Miss Lee's own trauma had metastasized into something harmful, how Mr. Davidson's grief had been weaponized, how Mrs. Sanders's desire to help had enabled abuse. The legal process dragged on. Lawyers argued about intent versus impact. Miss Lee's attorney claimed insanity, painting her as a victim of PTSD who genuinely believed she was protecting us. Mr. Davidson pled guilty to lesser charges, hoping for leniency. Mrs. Sanders maintained she'd done nothing illegal by not reporting concerns. Meanwhile, we tried to heal. Some kids formed a support group. Others avoided anything that reminded them of that day. I fell somewhere in between, unable to forget but determined not to let it define me. The coat closet in my mind felt smaller each day, but it never fully disappeared. 3 months later, they finally announced school would reopen with new staff. Miss Lee's classroom would be converted to storage. Metal detectors would be installed. Counselors would be available daily. Parents could observe classes through video feeds. Every measure to restore trust they'd shattered. I decided to go back, not because I felt safe, but because hiding meant Miss Lee had won. She'd wanted to teach us fear, and I refused to graduate with that as my final lesson. Some friends joined me, others couldn't, and I understood. Trauma heals at different speeds. The first day back was surreal. New teachers smiled too brightly. Security guards stood at every corner. Parents lingered in the parking lot, unable to fully let go. We were all performing normalcy, pretending the building didn't hold our worst memories. In history class, our new teacher, Mr. Williams, avoided any mention of violence. He focused on ancient civilizations, as far from current events as possible. When the intercom crackled, half the class flinched. He pretended not to notice, but I saw saw his hands shake slightly as he continued the lesson. Lunch felt different without Mr. Davidson sneaking us extra cookies. The new janitor was professionally distant, which was probably better. Trust had become a luxury we couldn't afford. Every adult was suspect now, potentially harboring dangerous ideas about our safety. After school, I found myself standing outside Miss Lee's old classroom. The door was locked, windows covered with paper. Somewhere inside was the closet where she'd forced Isabella to be Amelia, the corner where she'd positioned us like chess pieces, the hidden camera that recorded our terror. Another student joined me, Sarah from my English class. She'd been under a desk during the drill, close enough to hear Miss Lee's deranged whispers to Isabella. We didn't speak, just stood there acknowledging the space that had changed us forever. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom, checking if I was ready for pickup. Normal parent concern, but now tinged with the fear that any adult could snap and decide trauma was education. I told her I'd be right out, taking one last look at the covered windows. The investigation continued expanding. Dr. Hoffman's support group had chapters in 12 states. Each one encouraged different levels of preparation drills. Some just talked about scenarios. Others, like Miss Lee's group, took action. The FBI got involved, trying to prevent copycats. At home, my parents had installed new locks and a security system, not because of any specific threat, but because Miss Lee had taught us that danger could come from trusted sources. The illusion of safety was gone, replaced by vigilant awareness that probably wasn't healthy either. Some nights I dreamed about the closet, but not always as nightmares. Sometimes I dreamed I could warn Amelia, tell her which corner was safest. Other times I dreamed Miss Lee was still my teacher. Before the breakdown, when she just double-checked locks and memorized parent faces, the normal worry that became monstrous. Isabella's family sent word that she was improving. She'd started speaking again, though she refused to discuss that day. Her parents were suing the school district, claiming negligence in hiring and monitoring Miss Lee. Other families joined the lawsuit, seeking accountability for manufactured trauma. The legal battles would continue for years, but I tried to focus on moving forward. Each day got slightly easier. The hypervigilance faded. The flinching at loud noises decreased. Slowly, incredibly slowly, we were learning to exist in a world where teachers might traumatize you for your own good. But I knew the real test would come later. When I had kids of my own, would I trust their teachers? When they practiced lockdown drills, would I wonder if someone had decided to make it real? Miss Lee had poisoned more than just our 8th grade year. She'd poisoned our ability to trust those meant to protect us. For now, though, I focused on today, on choosing to attend school despite everything, on refusing to let manufactured fear control me, on believing that most adults, unlike Miss Lee and her network, actually wanted to keep us safe without traumatizing us first. The investigation was far from over. More names would surface, more connections would be revealed. But that was for Detective Martinez and the FBI to handle. My job was simpler: survive 8th grade without letting Miss Lee's twisted lesson plan define my future. As my mom drove me home, I watched the school shrink in the side mirror. Tomorrow I'd return, and the day after that. Not because I felt safe, but because I refused to let fear win. Miss Lee had tried to teach us through trauma. The real lesson was choosing to heal despite it. The car ride home stretched endlessly as I stared at passing houses, each one containing families who had no idea what we'd endured. My mom kept glancing at me through the rearview mirror, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. She pulled into our driveway and called the engine, but neither of us moved to get out. Inside, my dad was pacing the living room with his phone pressed to his ear. He gestured frantically while speaking to someone about security systems and homeschooling options. My younger brother Jake sat on the couch, confused by all the tension. He attended the middle school across town and had only heard rumors about what happened. I headed straight to my room and collapsed on my bed. My phone vibrated with messages from classmates, each one processing the trauma differently. Some wanted to talk about every detail. Others pretended nothing happened. I ignored them all and opened my laptop instead. The news coverage was everywhere. Grainy footage from security cameras showed parents rushing toward our school, police cars surrounding the building. Comment sections overflowed with debates about school safety and mental health screening for teachers. None of them understood what it felt like inside that closet. My mom knocked and entered without waiting for permission. She sat on the edge of my bed and rubbed my back the way she used to when I was little. Her hand trembled slightly. She tried to speak several times before finally managing to tell me that Aunt Victoria was coming to stay with us for a while. Aunt Victoria was my mom's older sister, a child psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery. She lived 3 hours away but had already packed her car and started driving when she heard the news. My mom thought having her around would help us process everything. I wasn't so sure I wanted to be analyzed in my own home. Jake appeared in my doorway, holding his basketball. He asked if I wanted to shoot hoops in the driveway like we usually did after school. The normalcy of his request made my chest tight. I shook my head and watched his face fall. He didn't understand why his sister had changed overnight. Dinner was quiet, except for the sound of forks against plates. My dad had ordered pizza, but nobody had much appetite. He kept checking his phone for updates from other parents. A group was forming to demand answers from the school board. They wanted accountability for how Miss Lee's breakdown went unnoticed. Aunt Victoria arrived as we were clearing the table. She swept into our house with 2 suitcases and immediately pulled me into a long hug. She smelled like lavender and coffee. Over her shoulder, I saw my parents exchange relieved looks. They thought she could fix everything. The way everyone's installing security systems and changing phone numbers makes me wonder if they're trying to lock out danger or lock in their own fear. Seems like Miss Lee's twisted lesson worked better than anyone wants to admit. We sat in the living room while I recounted the events again. Aunt Victoria listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes in a small notebook. When I finished, she closed the notebook and leaned forward. She explained that trauma responses were normal and would fade with time and proper support. The next morning, I woke to find Aunt Victoria making pancakes in our Kit Sanders. house. She'd already been up for hours, researching trauma therapy techniques and creating a routine to help me feel safe. The smell of breakfast was comforting, but my stomach churned at the thought of eating. My parents had decided to keep me home from school for the rest of the week. Other families made the same choice. Our class group chat showed that only 5 students had returned. The rest were either transferring schools or waiting to see what changes the administration would implement. Aunt Victoria suggested we take a walk around the neighborhood. Fresh air and movement would help, she claimed. We made it 2 blocks before running into Mrs. Patterson, whose daughter Emily was in my class. She hugged me tightly and whispered that Emily hadn't left her room since Friday. Back home, I found Jake in my room, sitting on my bed with my laptop open. He'd been reading news articles about the incident. His eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. He asked if it was really as scary as everyone said. I couldn't find words to explain. Aunt Victoria set up a makeshift office in our guest room. She started seeing some of my classmates whose parents brought them over for informal sessions. I could hear muffled voices through the wall, occasionally punctuated by crying. Each kid processed the trauma differently, but we all carried the same weight. Detective Martinez called to schedule a follow-up interview. She needed more details about the photo Miss Lee showed us in the closet. My parents insisted on being present, and Aunt Victoria offered to join as well. The detective agreed to come to our house instead of making me return to the station. The interview was exhausting. Detective Martinez asked about every minute detail of those 6 hours. What exactly did Miss Lee say? How did she position Isabella? Who else was in the closet with me? Each question dragged me back into that dark space. Afterward, I overheard my parents arguing in hushed tones. My dad wanted to pursue legal action against the school district. My mom worried about putting me through a lengthy court battle. Aunt Victoria mediated, suggesting they focus on my recovery first and decide about lawsuits later. That evening, Isabella's mom called our house. Isabella had finally started talking, but only to ask about me. She wanted to know if I was okay, if I blamed her for what happened. Her mom's voice cracked as she relayed the message. I told her to tell Isabella that none of it was her fault. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by dreams of closets getting smaller and voices getting louder. I'd wake gasping, convinced I could hear gunshots. Aunt Victoria had warned this would happen. She'd left a nightlight in my room and her door open in case I needed her. The next day brought a surprise visitor. Sarah from English class stood on our porch with her mom. She held a box of homemade cookies and looked as exhausted as I felt. We sat in my backyard while our moms talked inside. Sarah had been under a desk near Isabella during the incident. Sarah revealed something that made my blood run cold. She'd overheard Miss Lee on the phone during lunch the day before the fake shooting. Miss Lee had been arguing with someone, insisting that Friday was the perfect day. Sarah hadn't thought much of it then, but now she wondered who was on the other end. We compared notes about Miss Lee's behavior in the weeks leading up to the incident. Sarah remembered seeing her meet with someone in the parking lot after school, a woman with short dark hair who drove a blue sedan. They'd talked intensely, with lots of hand gestures and what looked like arguing. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through the school's website. The staff directory showed photos of all employees. Sarah leaned over my shoulder as we scanned through them. Then she gasped and pointed at one photo. Mrs. Sanders, the counselor. She was the woman from the parking lot. My hands shook as I showed Aunt Victoria what we'd discovered. She immediately called my parents in. They contacted Detective Martinez, who said she'd already been investigating Mrs. Sanders' involvement, but this was new information about the parking lot meetings. Detective Martinez arrived within an hour with another officer. She took detailed statements from both Sarah and me. She showed us a timeline they'd been building. Mrs. Sanders had been meeting with Miss Lee for months, but the parking lot encounters were undocumented. The detective revealed that Mrs. Sanders had been released after questioning due to lack of evidence. She'd claimed to be trying to help Miss Lee, not enable her, but these secret meetings suggested deeper involvement. They'd need to bring her back in for more questioning. Sarah's mom decided they should leave before things got more complicated. As they walked to their car, Sarah turned back and mouthed, "Be careful," to me. Something in her expression made me uneasy. We'd stumbled onto something bigger than just one traumatized teacher. That night, Aunt Victoria made hot chocolate and we sat on the back porch. She talked about her own experience with trauma from years ago. A patient had attacked her during a session. She'd recovered, but it changed how she viewed safety. She understood the hypervigilance I was experiencing. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My chest tightened, remembering the last anonymous message. But this one was different. It was from a classmate named Marcus who'd gotten my number from someone else. He wanted to warn me about something. Marcus had seen Mrs. Sanders at the grocery store that afternoon. She'd been talking on her phone, looking agitated. He'd overheard her mention my name and something about keeping quiet. He thought I should know just in case. The message made my skin crawl. I showed the text to my parents and Aunt Victoria. My dad immediately called Detective Martinez again. She thanked us for the information and said they'd increase patrols near our house. The idea that we needed protection made everything feel more dangerous. Aunt Victoria suggested we implement a safety plan. We'd vary our routines, check in regularly, and avoid being alone. It felt like Miss Lee's paranoia spreading to our family. The very thing she'd claimed to prepare us for was happening because of what she'd done. The next morning, I woke to find my dad installing new locks on all our doors. He'd taken time off work to focus on home security. Jake watched from the stairs, his usual cheerfulness replaced by quiet worry. Our family was changing, shaped by trauma we'd never asked for. Aunt Victoria proposed we visit Isabella. She thought it might help both of us to talk. My parents were hesitant, but Isabella's mom had actually suggested the same thing. We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a quiet cafe downtown where we could have privacy. Isabella looked smaller than I remembered. She sat hunched in the booth, her mom's arm around her shoulders. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. We hugged awkwardly while our moms and Aunt Victoria gave us space to talk. Isabella's voice was barely a whisper as she described her nightmares. She kept reliving being forced to play Amelia. She'd researched the real Amelia Amelia online, found her obituary and memorial page. The resemblance was undeniable. Miss Lee had chosen her specifically for that reason. We talked about the closet, about the photo Miss Lee had shown us. Isabella revealed something she hadn't told anyone else. Miss Lee had whispered something to her during those 6 hours, something about making sure she knew the plan worked. Isabella had been too terrified to ask who she was. The conversation was interrupted when Isabella's mom's phone rang. Her face went pale as she listened. She ended the call and urgently whispered to my mom. Mrs. Sanders had been spotted parked outside Isabella's house that morning. Their neighbor had taken a photo of the blue sedan. We left the cafe immediately. Isabella's family was going to stay with relatives out of town. My mom called my dad to warn him while Aunt Victoria drove us home via a different route. The casual meetup had transformed into something that felt like fleeing danger. At home, Detective Martinez was already in our driveway. She'd received the photo of Mrs. Sanders' car and wanted to discuss protection options. The investigation had revealed that Mrs. Sanders had access to all student records, including home addresses. She knew where we all lived. My dad had reached his breaking point. He demanded to know why Mrs. Sanders was free if she posed a threat. Detective Martinez explained the complexities of the case. Without concrete evidence of criminal intent, they couldn't arrest her for being near students' homes. That evening, we had an unexpected ally. Mr. Williams, our new history teacher, called my parents. He'd found something while cleaning out Miss Lee's old classroom. Hidden behind filing cabinets were printed emails between Miss Lee and someone using a coded email address. My parents drove to the school to meet him. I stayed home with Aunt Victoria and Jake, doors locked and curtains drawn. The house felt like a fortress. Jake asked if we were in danger. I didn't know how to answer honestly without scaring him more. They returned with photocopies of the emails. The messages discussed preparation protocols and necessary trauma exposure. The sender encouraged Miss Lee's escalating plans, even suggesting specific scenarios. The language was clinical, professional. It sounded like Mrs. Sanders' writing style. Detective Martinez took the emails as evidence. Isabella's mom getting that phone call about Mrs. Sanders lurking outside their house really takes school counselor home visits to a whole new level of creepy, doesn't it? She said they'd have cybercrimes analyze the sender's identity. If they could prove Mrs. Sanders sent them, it would establish her as an accomplice rather than a passive observer. Finally, we had something concrete, but Mrs. Sanders must have sensed the walls closing in. The next day, she showed up at our house. I was in the Kit Sanders when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw her standing there in professional attire, looking perfectly normal. My heart raced as I backed away from the door. Aunt Victoria immediately called 911 while my mom kept me away from windows. Mrs. Sanders rang the bell again, then knocked. She called out that she just wanted to talk, to explain her side. Her voice sounded reasonable, concerned. It was terrifying how normal she seemed. Police arrived within minutes. I watched through a crack in the curtains as they questioned Mrs. Sanders on our lawn. She gestured calmly, showing them her school ID. She claimed to be checking on students after the traumatic incident. The officers seemed uncertain what to do. Detective Martinez arrived and took over. She had a heated discussion with Mrs. Sanders, who maintained her innocence. Without an arrest warrant or restraining order, they could only ask her to leave. She complied, but not before looking directly at our window where I was watching. That night, none of us slept well. My parents took shifts staying awake. Aunt Victoria made coffee at 3 a.m. and sat with my dad in the living room. I could hear them discussing homeschooling options and whether we should temporarily relocate. The next morning brought a breakthrough. The cybercrimes unit had traced the coded emails. They originated from Mrs. Sanders' personal laptop. Combined with witness statements about the parking lot meetings, they finally had enough for an arrest warrant. Mrs. Sanders was taken into custody at her apartment. Detectives found journals documenting her research into trauma-based learning. She'd been using Miss Lee as a test subject, manipulating her grief to create a real-world experiment. We'd all been unwitting participants in her twisted study. The news hit our community hard. Parents who'd trusted Mrs. Sanders with their children's mental health felt betrayed. Stories emerged of other students she'd counseled, subtle suggestions she'd made about facing fears and building resilience through adversity. A support group formed for affected families. We met in the community center, sharing our experiences and fears. Some kids had noticed Mrs. Sanders' manipulative tactics earlier but hadn't been believed. Others, like me, were only now understanding the depth of her involvement. Aunt Victoria attended the meetings with us, offering professional insights while respecting her role as my aunt, not the group's therapist. She helped us understand how someone could use their position of trust to conduct such harmful experiments. Through the support group, I met other kids who'd received anonymous messages. The photos and texts had all come from burner phones purchased by Mrs. Sanders. She'd been monitoring our reactions, documenting our trauma responses for her research. As more evidence emerged, the full scope became clear. Mrs. Sanders had identified Miss Lee at the grief support group as someone vulnerable to manipulation. She'd spent months convincing her that traumatic preparation was necessary, feeding her paranoia and guilt over Amelia's death. The legal proceedings began. Mrs. Sanders was charged with multiple counts of child endangerment and conspiracy. Miss Lee's lawyer argued she was a victim too, manipulated by a trusted colleague. The whole situation was a tangle of trauma, manipulation, and misguided intentions. Our family slowly found a new rhythm. Aunt Victoria extended her stay, helping us process each new revelation. Jake started asking more questions, trying to understand why adults would hurt kids while claiming to protect them. His innocence was another casualty of this experience. School reopened with extensive new protocols, background checks, psychological evaluations, and oversight committees. Some families never returned. Our class, once 22 students, now had only 15. The empty desks were constant reminders of that Friday in May. I decided to return after 2 weeks at home. Walking through those doors took every ounce of courage I had. The hallway hallways looked the same but felt different. Security guards nodded as I passed. Teachers watched us more carefully, afraid of missing signs of their own. In Mr. Williams's class, we focused on ancient history, far removed from current traumas, but even discussions of past civilizations felt heavy. When we studied societies that sacrifice children for supposed greater goods, the parallel to our experience was unspoken, but felt. Isabella returned the same day I did. We gravitated toward each other, bound by shared trauma. We didn't talk about that day, but we didn't need to. Just sitting together at lunch, pretending to be normal teenagers, was its own form of therapy. The investigation continued revealing connections. Dr. Hoffman's support group was shut down. Other chapters faced scrutiny. Parents across the state demanded accountability. What started as one teacher's breakdown had exposed a network of dangerous ideology about preparing children for violence. Some nights were harder than others. I'd wake up convinced I heard someone at the door or window. My parents installed motion sensor lights that turned the yard into daylight at the slightest movement. Even raccoons became sources of panic. Aunt Victoria taught me grounding techniques. When anxiety spiraled, I'd name 5 things I could see, 4 I could hear, 3 I could touch. It helped, but the hypervigilance remained. Every unexpected sound at school made my heart race. Through it all, we learned to support each other. Sarah and I became closer friends, bonded by our discovery of Mrs. Sanders' involvement. Marcus, who'd warned me about the grocery store encounter, joined our lunch table. We were the kids who'd survived together. Detective Martinez visited one last time to update us on the case. Both Mrs. Sanders and Miss Lee would face trial. Mr. Davidson had agreed to testify about how they'd manipulated his grief. The janitor who'd just wanted to prevent another tragedy had become their tool. As summer approached, our class held an informal gathering. Not at school, but at a local park. We played volleyball badly and ate too much pizza. For a few hours, we were just teenagers again. The weight lifted temporarily, showing us who we might still become. My parents slowly relaxed their vigilance. The motion lights stayed, but they stopped checking locks multiple times each night. Jake returned to his basketball games. Aunt Victoria prepared to return home, though she promised regular visits. The night before she left, Aunt Victoria and I sat on the porch one last time. She reminded me that healing wasn't linear. There would be setbacks and difficult days, but she'd seen my strength and knew I'd find my way forward. As we talked, my phone buzzed with a message from Isabella. She'd decided to speak at the next support group meeting about her experience. She wanted me there for moral support. I agreed immediately. We were learning that facing trauma together made us all stronger. The investigation had revealed the full extent of the conspiracy, but the healing was just beginning. Each day brought small victories and occasional setbacks. We were finding our way back to normal, even as we redefined what normal meant. The investigation had revealed the full extent of the conspiracy, but the healing was just beginning. Each day brought small victories and occasional setbacks. We were finding our way back to normal, even as we redefined what normal meant. Summer break arrived with mixed feelings. Part of me wanted the structure of school, the forced normalcy, but another part needed distance from those hallways. My parents compromised by enrolling me in a day camp across town where nobody knew about the incident. The first morning at camp, I froze when they announced an emergency drill. My hands started shaking as counselors explained evacuation procedures. A girl named Tori noticed my reaction and quietly moved closer, offering silent support without asking questions. That afternoon, Detective Martinez called with an update. Mrs. Sanders' lawyer was pushing for a plea deal. She'd admit to lesser charges in exchange for testimony about Dr. Hoffman's network. The detective warned us that meant she might serve minimal time. My dad's jaw clenched as he processed this information. Jake had started having nightmares too. He'd wake up asking if bad people were coming to his school. My parents found him a therapist who specialized in secondary trauma. Our whole family was learning that violence ripples outward, affecting even those who weren't directly involved. At camp, I slowly built new friendships with kids who didn't know my story. Tori became a close friend, though I caught her Googling my name once. She closed her laptop quickly when she saw me looking. We never discussed what she'd found. Isabella's family returned to town briefly to pack their house. Her mom called to arrange one last meeting. We met at the same cafe, but this time Isabella seemed stronger. She showed me a journal where she'd been writing about her experience. The pages were filled with her attempts to separate Amelia's story from her own. During our conversation, Isabella mentioned something strange. She'd been getting hang-up calls at their new number. When she answered, she could hear breathing before the line went dead. Her parents had reported it, but the calls came from different payphones each time. I started getting them too, always during dinner, always from payphones around town. My parents changed our number again, but somehow the calls found us. Detective Martinez said it could be anyone from Dr. Hoffman's support group, angry about the investigation. Mrs. Sanders showing up at their house in professional clothes makes me wonder how she thought that would help her case. Watching through the curtains while police question her on the lawn feels like watching someone try to act their way out of trouble. One evening, while helping my mom with groceries, I spotted a familiar blue sedan in the parking lot. My chest tightened, but when I looked closer, it was just a similar car. Mrs. Sanders was still in custody, but the paranoia she'd cultivated lived on. Sarah called that night with disturbing news. She'd been accepted to a private school for the fall, but during her admission interview, they'd asked detailed questions about the incident. Someone had sent them newspaper clippings and suggested Sarah might be traumatized and disruptive. We compared notes with other classmates. Marcus had lost his spot in advanced math because someone told the school he was too distracted by recent events. Emily's piano teacher had received an anonymous letter warning that Emily was unstable. Someone was sabotaging our attempts to move forward. Detective Martinez investigated but hit dead ends. The letters were typed, mailed from different locations. The phone calls to schools came from burner phones. Whoever was doing this understood how to avoid leaving traces. They also knew exactly how to hurt us. My parents considered private investigators, but the cost was prohibitive. prohibitive. We were already struggling with therapy bills and security upgrades. The financial strain added another layer of stress to our family's recovery. At camp, I threw myself into activities, trying to exhaust myself enough to sleep without dreams. During art class, I found myself drawing closets over and over. The counselor gently suggested I try drawing doors instead, open ones. Tori invited me to her birthday party. I wanted to go, but panicked at the thought of being in an unfamiliar house with people I didn't know. My parents encouraged me to try. They dropped me off with promises to stay nearby. The party was normal until someone suggested hide and seek. My body went cold. I made an excuse about feeling sick and called my mom from the bathroom. She picked me up without questions, understanding that some games weren't games anymore. Isabella's family decided not to move after all. Her dad's job transfer fell through, and they couldn't afford to relocate without it. Isabella returned to our support group, looking defeated. The fresh start she'd hoped for had crumbled. During the meeting, we discussed the sabotage campaign. Other families were experiencing similar harassment. Dr. Patel, who facilitated our group, suggested we were dealing with someone who felt threatened by our recovery, someone who believed Mrs. Sanders and Miss Lee were right. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every car that passed our house made me tense. My dad found me checking the locks at 2 a.m. He didn't scold me, just made hot chocolate and sat with me until dawn. The next day brought a breakthrough. Mr. Williams called my parents with news. While organizing summer school materials, he'd found a USB drive taped under Miss Lee's desk drawer. It contained videos of our safety drills from throughout the year, showing her progressive descent into obsession. But more importantly, it showed Mrs. Sanders in several videos, directing Miss Lee on camera angles and student positioning. In one video, she explicitly discussed using us as test subjects for her dissertation on trauma-based learning. We finally had undeniable proof of her involvement. Detective Martinez fast-tracked the evidence to the prosecutor. Mrs. Sanders' plea deal evaporated. She now faced serious charges with video evidence. Her lawyer tried to suppress the USB drive, claiming illegal search, but the judge ruled it admissible. The harassment stopped abruptly after Mrs. Sanders' new charges were filed. Detective Martinez suspected Sanders' supporters realized the increased scrutiny made continued action too risky. We were finally free from anonymous threats, though the hypervigilance remained. As summer waned, I faced a decision: return to our school or transfer somewhere fresh. My parents left it up to me. After much deliberation, I chose to stay. Running felt like letting them win. Plus, my real friends were there, the ones who understood. Sarah decided the same, Marcus too, even Isabella, despite everything. We formed a pact to face 9th grade together. We'd be the kids who survived 8th grade's nightmare and came back stronger. The week before school started, Aunt Victoria visited for a check-in. She noted my progress, but also my lingering anxiety. She taught me new coping strategies and reminded me that healing wasn't linear. Some days would be harder than others. Jake had started playing basketball again, though he insisted on practicing where I could see him from my window. Our family had developed these small accommodations, ways of feeling safer without admitting we were still scared. Mr. Davidson wrote letters to each student from prison. Mine arrived on a Tuesday. His handwriting was shaky as he apologized, explaining how grief had clouded his judgment. He begged forgiveness, but said he'd understand if we couldn't give it. I kept the letter, but couldn't respond. The night before school started, I barely slept. Every worst-case scenario played through my mind. What if another teacher had been influenced by Dr. Hoffman's group? What if Mrs. Sanders had accomplices we didn't know about? The questions spiraled until dawn. My mom made my favorite breakfast, though I could barely eat. She drove me to school early, before the crowds. We sat in the parking lot watching other families arrive. Some looked as nervous as we felt. Others seemed to have moved on completely. Walking through those doors took everything I had. The hallways had been repainted. Mrs. Lee's classroom converted to storage as promised, but I could still feel the weight of that day in May. Some things can't be painted over. In homeroom, our new teacher introduced herself with excessive cheer. She'd clearly been briefed on our class's history. Every word seemed carefully chosen to avoid triggers. The effort was appreciated, but exhausting. Isabella sat next to me, our unspoken agreement to stay close. When the intercom crackled for morning announcements, half the class flinched. The teacher pretended not to notice, but I saw her hand pause over her coffee cup. First period brought a surprise. Dr. Patel was there as our new guidance counselor. The district had hired her specifically for our grade. Having someone who already knew our story felt like a small mercy. At lunch, our survivors table had grown. New students who'd heard our story gravitated toward us, seeking understanding. We'd become unwilling experts in trauma recovery, guides for others navigating their own darkness. The afternoon brought an emergency drill. My body reacted before my mind could process. Heart racing, palms sweating, the familiar urge to hide overwhelming rational thought, but I forced myself to follow the normal procedures. One step, then another. After school, my mom was waiting exactly where she'd promised. Her relief at seeing me was palpable. We drove home in comfortable silence, both processing the small victory of surviving the first day. That evening, Isabella called. She'd made it through too, though she'd spent lunch in the bathroom crying. We talked about the strange mix of pride and exhaustion that came from facing our fears. Neither of us mentioned Amelia's name. Detective Martinez visited one last time before the trials began. She wanted to prepare us for testimony. The process would be difficult, she warned, but necessary for justice. Mrs. Sanders' lawyer would try to discredit us as traumatized and unreliable. My parents hired a victim's advocate to help me prepare. We practiced testimony until the words felt mechanical. The strategy was to remain factual, unemotional. Don't give the defense anything to twist. The trial date approached like a storm on the horizon. News vans appeared outside the courthouse. My parents arranged for us to enter through a side door. The last thing I needed was cameras in my face. Inside the courtroom, Mrs. Sanders sat perfectly composed in a gray suit. She looked like any other professional woman. Nothing about her appearance suggested said she'd orchestrated our trauma for research. The banality of evil, Aunt Victoria had called it. When my turn came to testify, my legs felt weak walking to the stand. But Isabella was in the gallery, along with Sarah and Marcus. Their presence gave me strength. I spoke clearly about that day, about the photos, about the terror Mrs. Sanders had helped create. Mrs. Sanders' lawyer tried to paint me as confused, traumatized, misremembering, but the USB videos spoke louder than any cross-examination. The jury saw her directing Miss Lee, discussing her dissertation, treating us like lab rats. The verdict came after 3 days of deliberation, guilty on all counts. Mrs. Sanders' composed mask finally cracked. She looked shocked, as if she'd never considered consequences for her actions. As they led her away, she stared at us with something like betrayal. Miss Lee's trial was different. Her lawyer painted her as Mrs. Sanders' victim, manipulated in her grief. The prosecution showed she'd been a willing participant. The truth probably lay somewhere between. The jury found her guilty but recommended psychiatric treatment. Mr. Davidson had already pled guilty and was serving 2 years. His testimony had helped convict the others. Some parents thought his sentence too light. Others recognized him as another victim of manipulation. The community remained divided. With the trials over, we tried to find our new normal. The media attention faded. The security measures at school became routine. Slowly, painfully, we rebuilt trust in the adults around us. Dr. Patel started a peer support program. Those of us who'd survived became mentors for younger students dealing with anxiety. We turned our trauma into something useful, though the irony wasn't lost on us. By October, the nightmares had mostly stopped. I could sit through emergency drills without panicking. The coat closet in my mind had finally opened, letting light in. Progress came in small victories. Isabella started dating a boy from another school who didn't know her story. She debated telling him but decided to wait. She wanted to be known as more than the girl who was forced to play a dead child. Sarah got into the advanced literature program she'd wanted. Marcus made the math team. We were reclaiming the futures that had been threatened. Each achievement felt like defiance against those who'd tried to break us. The 1-year anniversary approached with mixed emotions. The school planned a memorial service, but many of us felt it was too soon. We compromised on a private gathering, just our class and families. We met in the park where we'd had our informal reunion. No speeches or formal programs, just people who understood each other's pain sharing a meal. Healing happened in these quiet moments, not grand gestures. As sophomore year progressed, the incident became part of our history rather than our identity. New students knew something had happened, but the details faded. We became regular teenagers again, mostly. Jake had grown taller and more confident. He still checked on me sometimes, but the role reversal felt natural now. Our family had survived by adapting, by accepting that safety was relative. Spring brought acceptance letters and plans for the future. Isabella was heading to art school. Sarah chose journalism. I'd decided on psychology, hoping to understand how people like Mrs. Sanders justified their actions. Graduation day arrived with sunshine and nervous energy. As we lined up in our caps and gowns, I caught Isabella's eye. We'd made it. Despite everything, we'd survived and thrived. Dr. Patel spoke at the ceremony, carefully avoiding direct references to our shared trauma, but her message was clear. Resilience comes from facing darkness and choosing light anyway. The audience applauded, not knowing the weight of her words. As I walked across the stage, I thought about Amelia, the girl whose death had started this chain of events. I wondered if she'd be proud that we'd survived what others had twisted from her tragedy. My parents waited with flowers and tears. Jake gave me an awkward teenage hug. Aunt Victoria had driven in for the occasion. My support system stood ready to celebrate this milestone. The summer before college stretched ahead with possibility. I'd gotten into my first choice school, 3 hours away, far enough for independence, close enough for safety. The balance felt right. Isabella and I spent our last weeks together creating art about our experience. Not for exhibition or therapy, just for us. She painted closets that opened into gardens. I wrote about the difference between safety and paranoia. The night before leaving for college, I stood in my empty bedroom. The motion sensor lights still blazed outside. Some security measures had become permanent, but I no longer checked them obsessively. My parents drove me to campus in comfortable silence. They helped me unpack, fussed over my dorm room, and pretended they weren't crying. When they left, I felt simultaneously free and terrified. My roommate was friendly but curious about my past. I gave her the simplified version, a teacher who went too far trying to protect us. She accepted it without pushing. I appreciated the chance to control my own narrative. Classes started with the usual freshman chaos. I threw myself into psychology courses, searching for answers about human behavior. Each lesson felt like piecing together a puzzle of what had happened to us. The first emergency drill at college sent my heart racing, but I followed procedures, breathed through the anxiety, and survived. My roommate noticed but didn't comment. Small mercies. October brought news from home. Dr. Hoffman's network had been completely dismantled. Federal charges were filed against remaining members. The ideology of trauma-based preparation had finally been recognized as abuse. I joined the campus peer counseling program. My experience, once a burden, became a tool for helping others. Late-night conversations with struggling freshmen reminded me how far I'd come. Isabella visited during fall break. She'd dyed her hair and seemed lighter somehow. Art school was helping her process everything. She showed me her latest work, a series on reclaiming identity after trauma. We talked about the others. Sarah was thriving in journalism, writing pieces on institutional failures and protecting children. Marcus had found peace in mathematics, the certainty of numbers a comfort after so much chaos. Thanksgiving brought our first real reunion. The survivors' lunch table reconvened at Sarah's house. We'd all changed, grown, moved forward, but the bond remained. Some connections are forged in fire. That night, I helped Jake with his college applications. He wrote about growing up in the shadow of trauma, about learning strength from watching others heal. His essay day made me cry with its maturity. Winter break passed quietly. The anniversary of the trials came and went with less weight than expected. Time was doing its work, softening edges without erasing importance. Second semester brought new challenges and victories. I made Dean's List, started dating someone who listened to my whole story without flinching, found joy in ordinary college experiences. A professor assigned a paper on institutional betrayal. I wrote about Mrs. Sanders and Dr. Hoffman's network with clinical detachment. The A+ felt like vindication. Understanding had replaced raw pain. Spring arrived with acceptance letters for Jake. He'd chosen a school 2 states away. My parents struggled with letting him go, but I recognized his need for distance. We all heal differently. As freshman year ended, I packed my dorm room with mixed emotions. College had given me space to be more than a survivor, but home still held the people who understood without explanation. The drive home felt different this time. I wasn't fleeing to safety or returning to trauma. I was simply going home. The distinction mattered more than I could articulate. That summer, I worked at a day camp. When emergency drills came, I helped the scared children through them. Full circle from my own camp experience. Healing through helping. August brought preparation for sophomore year. I'd declared a double major in psychology and social work. My advisor warned about the emotional toll. I explained I'd already paid it. The night before returning to school, our support group held its final official meeting. We'd outgrown the need for formal sessions. Dr. Patel smiled through tears as she declared us graduated. As I packed my car for sophomore year, I found Mr. Davidson's letter in my desk drawer. After 2 years, I finally wrote back. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement of shared manipulation. Another small closure. My parents seemed calmer this time. Jake was thriving at his school. They'd learned to trust our resilience. The house felt less like a fortress, more like a home again. The drive to campus was peaceful. I'd chosen an apartment off campus with friends who knew my story but didn't define me by it. Independence with understanding. The perfect balance. As I unpacked in my new space, I hung Isabella's painting of opening closets, a reminder of where I'd been and how far I'd come. Beauty from ashes, hope from trauma. That evening, I sat on my apartment balcony watching the sunset. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new growth, but tonight, I was simply a college student enjoying the view. The ordinary had become extraordinary. My phone buzzed with messages from the survivors group chat, pictures of new dorm rooms, updates on majors, normal college kid stuff. We'd made it through to the other side. As darkness fell, I noticed I hadn't checked the locks once. The hypervigilance had finally faded to normal caution. Mrs. Sanders and Miss Lee no longer haunted my daily life. I thought about the girl I'd been in that coat closet. Terrified, traumatized, certain life would never be normal again. I wished I could tell her she'd be okay. More than okay. The stars came out over campus. Somewhere, Amelia's real family was healing too. Our stories had intersected in tragedy but diverged toward hope. That felt like the best honor to her memory. My roommate called me inside for movie night. I closed the balcony door and joined my friends. No checking locks, no scanning for danger. Just a normal night in my normal life. Finally, beautifully normal. Thanks for letting me wander along with you through all of this. It's been quite a journey together. Until next time.